Peace, peace, peace. Peace, peace and power, peace and plenty. Peace and power, peace and plenty. Peace and empowerment. Power to the people, all power to the people all the time. We are here at the date of September 2nd, 2020. We are on Veterans for Peace Stand Down webinar. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. If you're tuned in with this program, we thank you for tuning in to this frequency. And we ask you to share this across your social media, share this with your friends and your family, get this conversation going. We started these stand downs as a way to ask our active duty military, our National Guard, to stand down when the person in office has asked them to go into cities and hold arms against peaceful protesters. We recognize that we are on occupied land here in this country, stolen land, and that the platforms that we're using are built on the blood and bones of stolen bodies. We're coming to you from different cities. We are in a state of lockdown. We are in a state of global pandemic, and our country is not doing, a lot of people think we're not doing the right things about it. We're going to hopefully talk about all these things and more today. This past weekend, we had the wake of the RNC and the 45th electorate in office going to Kenosha, Wisconsin, even though he was asked not to go by the governor and the mayor and many officials in the area. He went anyway and did not address the murder, or not the murder, the shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back by police officers, and instead doubled down on saying that the shooter the shooter was justified, or the shooter might have choked under pressure. So, you know, we need to learn escalation of violence seriously in the police force. And the call for stand down is also defund the police, defund the military. And I'm very happy to have a revolutionary Maoist socialist on with us today. Will Griffin, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, comrade, and former VFP board member. Mike James will be leading the conversation today, and I look forward to it being lively and spirited and inspirational. So thank you for tuning in. Please get active in the comment section, in the chat section, and again, share this with your family and your friends. And this is a call for peace, y'all. So let's keep it peaceful. Trolls, you will be shut down. All right, Mike James, it's all right. You.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. This is always fun. I'm always glad to be here. Everything that you spoke about in the opening is of the utmost importance, and I'm glad it's said. We are all here on occupied land, and it's always important to think about that. And you know, I think about it in my day-to-day goings about. When I drive around and I see the world that we live in, I always try to keep that in mind. But man, where do we start? There's a lot going on. So specifically talking about, we'll get this out of the way, a little bit of Veterans for Peace news. I just got an email recently from Veterans for Peace, and it talks about, one, some things we should be aware of. There's a program called the Truth in Recruitment Call. It says here, many Veterans for Peace members and chapters engage in our counter recruitment work. Come join our monthly calls to share ideas, resources, and develop ways to coordinate our efforts to interrupt the ongoing military pipeline that targets youth and poor and working class people. The first call will be held September 3rd at 7 p.m. Central Time, and on the first Thursday of every month. That'll be a Zoom call, and you can find out more about that on the website, and check your emails if you haven't seen it. Also, there will be a VFP book club. It says here, the purpose of this group is to explore with others via discussion of various books and other media in a safe and open social space, the ways in which colonization, racism, gender bias, and other biases show up in our lives and in our activism. So look out for the VFP book club. And then also VFP is hosting social hours every Tuesday and Thursday from 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 Middle, 11 PST to join, or Mountain Time, not Middle, to join Social Hour. It'll be a Zoom call. Look out for that. You can order newsletter bundles from VFP. So if you need newsletter bundles, please reach out. And then also, we as veterans need to be preparing for our Miss This Day. Our Miss This Day is traditionally one of Veterans for Peace's biggest action days around the country. This year, it might look a little different in most cities. We are beginning planning for 2020 Our Miss This Day, and we want to hear from you. What are you planning this year? Please reach out and let us know what you're thinking about for our Miss This Day. So that covers all Veterans for Peace news or bullet points that we have right now. And we'd like to go ahead and get into this conversation. Really happy to have our comrade Will here today. Always a brilliant speaker, organizer, activist. He is an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. He is a former board member on Veterans for Peace, and he is active as a organizer for the United Panther movement. So thank you for being here, Will.
Hey, all power to the people. Good to see y'all, comrades, again.
Yeah, good to see you too. Man, okay, where do we start? You know, Will, what I'd like to know is if you could tell us a little bit about your transition and your process as you came back a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and what was your development like as you became an activist?
Well, yeah, and also thanks for having me on. I think y'all are doing some good stuff here with these live streams. So I think to answer that question, I have to talk about my position in the military a little bit. You know, especially for folks who haven't been in the military, they think everyone's infantry, kicking down doors, doing all that stuff. You know, I was a mechanic, and yeah, I saw a lot of indirect fire, but I wasn't kicking down doors and doing any of that stuff. I was a mechanic. I was in the motor pool, or what the civilian world calls like an auto shop, working on vehicles all day, all night. You know, if that's the type of war that we were in, right? If the vehicles weren't up and running, the mission wasn't going to go through. So we were working a lot. I was also, you know, most people think of like a white man as their typical like version of a soldier. But you know, a lot of people of color, black and brown folks that join are usually in support jobs, right? So I was in infantry, I was in support, but I was in Iraq when President Bush announced the surge there. I was in Afghanistan when President Obama announced the surge there. I shortly got out after that in 2010. But throughout my experience, especially after my first deployment to Iraq, I started having a lot of questions. Obviously, our chain of command isn't going to tell us. They probably don't even know why we're actually over there. Why it's failing. I was in both surges. They've both failed. You know, so I had a lot of questions. And I eventually got out, went to the college, went to university, used my GI Bill. And actually studied U.S. foreign policy history. That answered some questions, but I also did a lot of personal research online, doing my own reading, and basically figured out that I was on the wrong side of history. You know, I had a history professor tell me, like, you are definitely a part of history. And actually an Iraqi-American history professor telling me, you know, as someone who participated in an institution that has destroyed his home country for generations and decades, telling me that I am a part of history. And you know what? I am a part of history, but I realize now that I was on the wrong side of history. So that was deep, right? A lot of veterans can't or won't even ask that question or answer the question, let alone, right? But I was willing to, because I was fed up. I needed answers. I was willing to figure out what was going on. And I just came to the point where I feel like society has been lying to me my whole entire life in my mid-20s when I got out of the military, right? Everything was not as it seemed. The American dream is exactly that, a dream. You're not going to become a millionaire, even though that's basically what they tell us as we're young. If as long as you work hard, you'll be successful, whatever that means in this capitalist society. And getting out in 2010, shortly after the Great Recession of 2008, things haven't gotten better. Climate change is getting worse. None of the wars have ended. Inequality has sharpened. Nothing really has gotten better for the majority of people. Now, it has gotten better for a minority of people. Jeff Bezos is on track to be the world's first trillionaire, right? So it has worked for some people. And that's what I started to wrap my head around, is like, okay, we can call this system corrupt or whatever, but it does work for some people, and it's working really, really well. So, I actually started to get involved with the anti-war peace movement. My background is Korean. I was actually born overseas on a U.S. military base in the mid-'80s. I joined Veterans for Peace. It was one of the first peace and anti-war organizations I joined. And then I started traveling the world on all these delegations back to Korea, Okinawa and Japan, the UK, and all across this country. We went to Standing Rock and all of these things that has happened in the past like 10 years, basically. And I started to realize, things need to change on a deeply systematic level. And I've had different ways of thinking of how to do that. But every time, and I'm sure anybody who's been an activist or an organizer, at least for the past 10 years, if not longer, we are losing. Why can't we just look in the mirror and be like, you know what? Our strategies, our tactics, the way we're thinking and analyzing about everything is just not working. So it kept, as they say, pushing me more left. It was easier for me to really change positions because after getting out of the military, admitting that I was on the wrong side of history in an institution that was destroying innocent lives all around the world, not just the wars that we're bombing in. I never wanted to make that mistake again. I never wanted to be on the wrong side of history. And I was totally willing to look in the mirror and be like, you know what, this isn't right. I need to do something that is right. I need to change the way I look at the world. I need to totally change my worldview. And actually, that is a part of a lot of people who have PTS or PTSD, post-traumatic stress. People develop, and they never talk about this, right? Some people, not everybody with PTS, some people develop post-traumatic growth. And that is basically meaning like you have a traumatic experience, so it cuts you so deep that it completely changes your worldview. And therefore you actually grow and become a better person from it. Now that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but I think the fundamental part I'm talking about is having your deep beliefs about the world. I questioned religion when I got out. I was a Christian when I was in the military. I'm a non-religious person now, right? I believed in capitalism when I was in the military. I believe in socialism now. I thought America was the best country in the world. I think it's the worst country in the world now, right? So my worldview has completely flipped upside down in the past 10 years. And I've actually been able to study history and show that, you know what? The US is not the greatest country in the world. So I've been able to find the evidence and try to develop what I would call a scientific outlook on the world, right? Not just the crap that they feed us in public education schools, on mainstream media, on our advertisements, on Hollywood movies, on some live streams on Facebook, not this one, right? It's just constantly telling us America is great. America is great. The wars are good. We're doing good. Capitalism is good. Go out and shop and you'll be happy, right? So I started questioning all that. I got heavy in the peace and anti-war movement for several years. I still am, but I've kind of distanced myself away from the movement overall. If you want to call it a movement, that's debatable because it's so small. And, no wars have really ended. And like organizations are struggling, trying to get members to join and fundraise and all this stuff. So I actually started looking deeper, and I started looking into socialism. And I would call myself a scientific socialist as compared to, say, a democratic socialist or a utopian socialist. Because I remember getting into socialism a long time ago, and I was like, there's so many different types of socialism. Like, there isn't just one standard of socialism. But I wanted to have the most precise and accurate analysis in order to be as successful as possible in changing society for the majority of people in this country and around the world. And that's where I am today, where I am a lead organizer in the United Panther movement. But I've also done a lot of different things. You know, I started the Peace Report. You know, it's got a lot of followers, got a lot of views. It's mainly video production. And I'm tied with a lot of different organizations on the left that are progressive, peace and anti-war movement organizations, so on and so forth. So I've really just been able to just check out the world with a different lens and realize, like, yo, basically, like what Rosa Luxemburg said 100 years ago, it's socialism or barbarism, right? Like we need, and the thing with our generation, with our time right now, is changing society and changing the world has a time limit on it now due to climate change and nuclear weapons, right? So we got to get to work, right? So get over your ego and see what needs to be done and acknowledge that.
Yeah. You know, well, something that's, go ahead, Miles. You got something you want to say?
I just want to ask Will a question, because it's about the chat and it's about this flag, and I've been called out in recent weeks for being anti-Semite. Somehow the flag has been linked to that in somebody's mind. So can you break it down? We have a couple of people in the chat who might think that we are anti-white man, or you know, can you break down how socialism and capitalism are at odds fundamentally, and how social and maybe break down, if you could, how socialism is actually more for people than capitalism? Like, because, you know, is it, you know, like, which one is actually anti-white man or anti-any man? You know, that would be an interesting question for somebody in the chat, I'm sure.
Yes.
It's a big question.
Wait, didn't socialism kill 100 million people? Oh my goodness. You know, people say, I believe that. Well, like, I would say, where people who say that don't even know where that statistic comes from. But you know what? I'll tell people it came from a book that was edited by a fascist, and the book was called The Black Book of Communism, and it had many different authors. And this guy, he kept trying to get to 100 million, but he only got to 94 million, saying that communism killed 94 million people. But he edited the book and published it. And even the authors who contributed to the book said, you know what? We disagree with this. What is this guy doing? We disagree with the number. We didn't agree to this. Go to the Wikipedia page. Even though Wikipedia is not the best source in the world, but still, on the Wikipedia page of the book, The Black Book of Communism, it even says, with footnotes, that the authors of the book deeply criticize the editor for doing all of this. So now you know where that number comes from. Anyways, I think that's important to understand, because you might have someone say that in the chat group. Anti-white. Well, we do live in a white supremacist nation. We live in a white supremacist world, right? I think we can oppose white supremacy without being anti-white. Not to mention, this is a patriarchal society, a patriarchal world. Does that mean we're going to be anti-man? No, we oppose patriarchy, right? And there's ways to do that. Now, there are people, due to their oppression, which say, I have no idea what it's like to be a black man in America. I know what it's like to be treated as brown, as Korean, as East Asian. I've been called all those names, dog eater, whatever the hell, right? Growing up in the South. But I don't know what it's like to be a black man in America. But there are people, right, who are oppressed their whole entire lives from white people, and they're going to develop an anti-whiteness because of how they're treated, right? I understand that. I mean, I can't fully understand it, but I get it. I get where they're coming from, right? And then you have white folks come in and be like, "Oh, you can't do that," even though the whole world has been like that for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And this dude or woman or non-binary comrade who is black has lived in a white supremacist, patriarchal country that has oppressed them their whole entire lives, whether they're 20 years old or 60 years old. That's a problem that we need to face. And I think America is trying to discuss those issues. I have a certain perspective on it. I do know the white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, all of these different types of oppression exist. But one thing that keeps being missed out in the conversation is class. I think, and from what I study, and we could study the Black Panther Party back in the day, which I do a lot nowadays. Fred Hampton and others were talking, we're talking about how racism is used by the capitalist class to divide the working class. Sexism is used by the capitalist class to divide the working class. Now, I don't want to sit there and just totally disregard someone's, experience of racism or sexism or whatever type of oppression, but we need to include class into that discussion as well. Because I do think it is, I'm reading this comment. Communism and capitalism are two sides of the coin. Wall Street funded. All right, yeah, great. I do know that socialism is possible. There has been a working class led revolution to overthrow the capitalist class. And one of the first things they do is to put women in power, to talk about different ethnic and racial disparities within their nation. We can't even get to that point right now, right? We can't even develop the institutions to educate our white comrades about the history and the current issues of racism or sexism or whatever it is, right? Because we live in a capitalist class, and it's the capitalism, and it's the capitalist class that creates all of the institutions that continue to tell us this ideology of American dream, of endless wars, of supporting the troops, of all this other stuff. And none of this is our ideas. So what is our ideas? What are our ideas? Well, we definitely, the majority of people want to live in an equal world. They want to provide for their family. They want to live in a safe and secure community. We can't have any of these things. We can't even start to do any of these things because we live in a capitalist system. If we lived in a socialist system, we would be able to do that. Now, a capitalist system is where a tiny minority of Jeff Bezoses all around the country control the means of production, control the state. They put the money into the politicians' pockets, right? And that's really the whole role of the state, is to protect that small minority of Jeff Bezoses. Socialism is the reverse opposite. It's when you put the people on top, the people in charge of society to make those institutions. What happened in socialist China? By the way, China is made up of many, many different nationalities, minorities, ethnic groups, right? What happened as soon as the Chinese Revolution in 1949 happened? They started to build these institutions to educate the Han majority of people, which is a certain ethnic group in China, to educate them on the oppression of other minorities in that country, right? Because they had the capability to do so, right? We can't do that right now. If we did, we would have the new African nation, Black communities, indigenous communities, Chicano communities, East Asian and South Asian communities coming together to develop these institutions to teach each other cultural education, political education, history about each other, so we can build a better world together. But we can't do that because we're constantly told from some capitalist class that comes in and says, hey, you know what? It's the immigrants that's taking all your jobs. Hey, you know what? It's the black man that keeps society down. Hey, you know what? Women are good for nothing except the kitchen. This is the shit that they tell us. This is what we were all raised on. Nobody wants to talk about it because we're all walking on eggshells about like how we can discuss all of this stuff to actually build a strategy or a tactic, have a vision, create better values, right? But we can't do that anymore. And I deeply oppose capitalism. I deeply oppose walking on eggshells where we can't even talk about this stuff, because, again, I try to be a scientific socialist. I try to analyze this in the most objective way that I can, basically, right? I forgot to mention the anti-Semitic thing, I guess. Right? That's just, people say that to just shut down conversations, right? That's the thing about walking on eggshells in a lot of spaces, no matter if you're on the left or right or wherever you are, is there's a certain level of toxicity that comes with identity politics. Right. And that's the crap we gotta stand up and say, you know what? No, we're not doing this. We could have an oppressed identity come into the room and shut down the conversation using that identity against everyone else in the room. Right. We can't do that anymore. That has failed for several years now. It is not working. And in fact, it's dividing us. Right. We can't even tell the truth. Even if it is a comrade that we're really close with, we can't even talk to them anymore because we're like, I might say something sexist or something like that. It's like, first of all, people are going to say it. We live in a sexist, racist, oppressive country. It's going to happen. It's whether we're going to learn from our mistakes, teach others that is the wrong type of behavior, and move on so we can actually build something stronger and actually, and face the real enemy, the capitalist class, the Jeff Bezoses of the world. I like to pick on Jeff Bezos because I'll probably never meet him in my life. And he is, he is a dirtbag, he is an absolute dirtbag that is destroying the world. And the Amazon workers are, that's a whole nother story. But anyways.
Well, we've certainly jumped both feet into the theoretical framework, and I certainly appreciate it and agree to a high degree. What we really want to do, though, is I think with the purpose of this show, Veterans for Peace, is we really want to make sure that we're connecting with veterans in the world, whether they are, still in the military, active duty, National Guard, and people who are kind of developing a revolutionary consciousness. And, we all go through a process. And it's not always a fun process. It can be kind of grueling and even painful. One thing that you said early in the show, Will, that really kind of sparked my interest and my imagination that I think you could speak to on a personal level that I think people could relate to is you went on a delegation with Veterans for Peace to Korea. And I just find it, I've never heard this story. I've never heard you talk about it before. And you coming from a Korean background, I'd really like to know a little bit about what that experience was like and what the impression you were left with coming back from Korea.
Well, yeah, it was great. By the way, I actually lived in South Korea as a kid before I ever came to the States. So going back on a political delegation opened my eyes a lot. I was actually raised conservative, raised in support of the U.S. military in South Korea. When I went on my first delegation in, I believe, 2015 to Jeju Island, South Korea, it really opened my eyes to the other side. For one thing, it showed how the U.S. military-industrial congressional complex exploits and oppresses people outside of the wars they're actively engaged in. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, all that, right? In South Korea, right? And I also went to Okinawa on that trip, and I saw the same thing there, right? So, and then I learned, the U.S. has over 800 military bases around the world. And I'm like, my God, this is happening all around the world? And what do these military bases do? First of all, Americans don't really know what it's like to have a foreign military base, in their backyard, in their communities, in their state, whatever. No idea what that's like. Imagine if a foreign military troop raped a woman from your community. That happens all the time overseas. What happened if they were just conducting, by the way, this just happened in South Korea. What if the foreign military was conducting a military training exercise, right? That's what the military does, whatever. But they accidentally kill some civilians in that community, right? This has happened in South Korea, Okinawa, many other places. So I learned about that type of exploitation and oppression and the history behind all that. And it got me to look into my own Korean history a lot more deeply. And basically we need to understand, as far as Korea goes, Korea is one nation, North and South. It is one nation split by foreign powers. The U.S. dominates the South. Even in the SOFA agreement, which is the Status of Forces Agreement, it clearly states that if a war between the South and North were to break out again, the U.S. military would control the South Korean government and all of the territory in the South, right? That's imperialism. That is domination. That is oppression. So with that said, that is in the legally binding documents of why the U.S. military is in South Korea. Can we really call South Korea an independent nation? We think, oh, they have elections. Oh, they have their own government. But that government is beholden to another foreign power. And then you'd have to ask the question, why is the military there? What's the purpose? And who does the military serve? I'm sure as us, veterans, we've been told that we serve the American people. We're providing a service for the people of the world. We're protecting the people of Korea in the southern half of the peninsula. But that's another thing I realized through my transition. It's like, no, as Smedley Butler, General Smedley Butler from the U.S. Marine Corps said, I was a gangster for capitalism. Basically saying we worked for corporations. Did we not see that in Iraq and Afghanistan? Why would it be different with 83 military bases in South Korea, right? Why would it be different with 32 military bases in Okinawa, right? Capital corporations have their commodities, goods, traveling all throughout the world, right? And they have to go from port to port or whatever. And those boats filled with capital need to be protected. Who protects those trade routes? The U.S. military. Why do we have a huge naval force? I would say that's the main reason. Is it? I forgot. What they taught me in school is that it's to protect the world from, I don't know, terrorists. But when you look deeper and you understand how wealth is generated and how wealth is protected by a certain class in society, you start to make these connections. Go ahead. I gotta let my dog out real quick.
Okay, yeah, we all saw your dog. He's heard all the rhetoric.
That was nice in the chat room, though. That was
he's ready to go.
Everybody was engaged in that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, since we've got you here, Will, you're such a great educator. I'm a big fan of the work that you put out on Peace Report. I really think that you explain ideas extremely well, and it's really helped me in my own education. I think when we're talking to veterans for peace, lowercase veterans who are anti-war or against war, I always wonder, there's a couple concepts that I think are really important to me developing an effective political consciousness. And I'd like to hear you describe it because you're so good at it. The first one would be, can you talk about what might be the difference between being anti-war and being anti-imperialist? And then the other concept that I think would be really useful is if you could describe the difference between being militant, or the difference between militancy and militarism. If you could talk about those concepts a little, I'd love to hear what comes off the top of your head.
All right, you may have to remind me of the second one, but the first one is the difference between anti-war and anti-imperialism.
Yeah.
Right. So right off the bat, when I think about it, a fascist, a white supremacist in America can be anti-war. they really can't be anti-imperialist because that whole system they believe in depends on imperialism, right? So that's one difference, right? We need to understand that. By the way, that's one of the big problems with the anti-war peace movement is the right is coming in. Fascists, there's fascist and white supremacist organizations that oppose the foreign wars. They're anti-war. Are we going to sit in the same circles as them? Some people debate this stuff within peace and anti-war organizations in those spaces. So basically, anti-war is just focusing on the military, maybe the political interventions overseas. Imperialism, essentially, that's what we got to understand. What is imperialism? Is it just bombing other countries, throwing our militaries in other countries? Well, not really. Honestly, imperialism is an economic system that requires a military and a state to protect that economic system, right? And real quick, I love to use this example because everybody gets it. If Mike, Miles, me, we're on an island with 100 people, a desert island in the middle of nowhere, 100 people, and one person holds all of the resources, the food, the shelter, everything, while everyone else and our kids and our families are starving and we need help. How long would that system last on that island? Really, how long do you think that system would last?
Well, it's designed to turn people against each other, right? I mean, that's its essential goal.
Right. Then it might, if the person who's in charge of the resources is giving them out fairly, it could last. But if they're withholding it, then I'd say when the first person gets hungry, it's going to start crumbling.
Yeah, exactly. Because some people are like, 3 days, a week, a month. I'm like, how about 5 minutes? Like nobody's going to fucking stand for that. Are you kidding me? If you had a 99 people, but what if that one person had weapons and hired 5 other people and said, you know what? Protect me and I'm gonna give you some benefits. I'm gonna give you some access to these resources. That's essentially the world we live in, right? And that is really what imperialism is. It's protecting that inequality gap on an international and global level, right? And that's the thing that a lot of veterans can't come face to face with. It's like, yo, did we do that? It's hard to say sometimes because some people just think about their own personal direct experience. I've literally had people that I deployed with was like, and I'd ask them, be like, don't you think the war in Afghanistan is BS? I'd be like, well, I know that I helped the Afghani people.
No, you didn't.
But no question of like who put you there in the first place. And the reason we're there 10 years later is a different reason from why we went in, right? Even the state is saying something different. So imperialism is an economic system. Iraq is a good example. Saddam Hussein was selling oil to Europe. And it wasn't about taking that oil and using it for us. The US, nobody really uses Iraqi oil. Look it up. It was about taking Iraqi oil off of the market to sell more. And guess who's competing to sell oil to Europe now? Russia, US, right? US has like some of the largest reserves in the world, right? Our production is actually very large, right? But we have to protect our markets all around the world. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, right? You're on mute, comrade.
I think it's Saudi Arabia has the largest reserves in the world, but you're right about the U.S. has the largest production.
I will challenge that and say that Saudi Arabia has the largest reserves in that region, and then Venezuela has the largest in the world. But regardless, that's a good example, though. Why is the U.S. friends with Saudi Arabia, but then going after Venezuela?
Right.
Maybe because Saudi Arabia is
armed to the teeth.
What?
Armed to the teeth with our weapons.
But they're also totalitarian, and they're very controlling of their people. Whereas Venezuela, prior to us helping the overthrow, was like socialist, was empowering the people. Like they had incredible wealth off their oil from, I think, like 15 years of it being nationalized or something, right? Like they did great things. Yeah.
Yeah. So in conclusion, being anti-imperialist means you have to oppose capitalism, Now, I want to go further and say being anti-imperialist doesn't necessarily make you a socialist. You could be anti-capitalist, but you don't have to be a socialist. You could be anti-imperialist, but you don't have to be a socialist. You're just opposing that, right? There's anarchism and all these other types of beliefs, worldviews, ideologies that may oppose a system, but then what to replace it with, that's a whole nother world of debate, right? And honestly, I'm in that world debating that stuff on how do we get to a socialist place? How do we get there? Because the strategies and tactics, like I said earlier, just aren't working, right? And we could talk about the protests that's going on now, but I don't know if you had. Oh yeah, you had another question.
Oh yeah. Okay, so let me frame it real quick. I think veterans, we get trained in martial traditions and in military life, and I think that's part of what makes us valuable as activists and organizers. But I think that there has to be an understanding in the difference between militarism and being militant or militancy. And I'd like to know, with your background and study of the Panther movement and their explanation and interpretation of militancy, I was hoping you might be able to shed some light on those definitions.
I definitely think about militarism as being like systemic, but militancy, I guess the easiest way to put it is like putting your foot down when it needs to be put down. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily mean going out, picking up weapons and shooting anything that moves, right? Militarism may mean that, right? Arm a whole whatever battalion, brigade, division to arm to the teeth and point in a direction and be like, go off, boys and gals. But militancy, we need, I think we need militancy, but only coming from a certain perspective. But people just put down militancy as if it's like a dirty word, and it shouldn't be in any space. And it's like, we're talking about changing the most powerful, destructive system in the world, and you don't want to be militant, meaning put our foot down and saying no more and doing what needs to be done. And if that does require something, quote unquote, violent, maybe so, but a lot of people that I know that are militant, our whole goal is to be as not militant at all. We're only forced in that position, right? And I think thinking about the military policies overseas, the domestic policies and the police here, the history of the genocide of indigenous nations, the slavery of Africans, the continuation of all this under mass incarceration, so on and so forth. They, for lack of a better term, have their boots on all of our necks. More pressure on others, but we're all suffocating under this system. And we're backed. Again, Huey P. Newton said they chose the Black Panther as their symbol because a panther never strikes unless it is backed up into a corner and forced to defend itself, right? Huey P. Newton was one of the co-founders of the Black Panther Party back in 1966, right? So I think that's the attitude we should really think about and really have, because it's going to require us putting our foot down and being like, no more, no more.
Yeah, that's right.
Would it be fair? I'm sorry, Mike. Is it okay? Would it be fair to say that militancy is used as a way to create discipline, or like, a standard of approach, not as a way to glorify guns and a gun culture? Would that be a fair?
Yeah. So one of the things we have all learned in the military, I think there are some good things that we can learn from our experience, right? Not everybody can join the military. Not everybody makes it throughout their contract by the end of it, right? Some people get kicked out. They're not allowed in, right? So in organizing spaces, people talk about ableist terms, right? Don't be ableist or whatever. I have the values of of uplifting the most oppressed and vulnerable people and marginalized people in society. But I also hold the position that shit needs to be done, and we're going to get people who can do it to do it, right? This is the mentality. That's the other half of the part that a lot of us in the organizing spaces have forgotten. It's like, yo, we need things to get done, right? And I think, the militancy of the Black Panther Party was a shining example of what could be. And look how far they got in a matter of a few years. And they weren't even that big of an organization, right? But their legacy is still with us today.
Can you illuminate us a little bit to that legacy? I think a lot of people don't know. Like, there's a couple of really key points. Could you illuminate us?
Yeah. So, they were like, oh, well, it's just a bunch of black men holding weapons that said kill Whitey. Well, first of all, the majority of the Black Panther Party's existence was majority women. All right, let's throw that out. They didn't always carry guns everywhere they went. Although they believed in the right to self-defense and the right to self-determination as a new African nation. But they also believed in working class power, and many believed in socialism. And the militancy, I've just been reading some of Sophia Bukhari's book, The War Before, which she was a Black Panther member. And oh man, she was talking about how she would show up late to meetings and they would make her do push-ups or laps around the field or whatever, right? Like, we remember those days, but that builds it does build a type of camaraderie within the organization, a discipline, and a commitment to say, you know what, I'm going to do this right next time. I'm committing myself to this space, to you comrades, to this organization, and I'm going to do what it takes. And if I mess up, correct me.
Will, a lot of people don't know about the food program, like the national school food program. Can you tell us how that started in this country?
I didn't know this before, but apparently kids didn't get fed breakfast in school, right? Like I'd never seen that in my life, and our generation is probably like, what? That was happening in the 60s? Well, the Black Panther Party initiated a free breakfast program. And this was great because, at first it was about the women cooking the breakfast in the morning, but the women were militant and was like, no, you guys are going to have to do some cooking too. We can share in all of this labor. And guess what? A lot of men were cooking. I believe if you see the trailer of Judas and the Priest, this new Fred Hampton movie that's coming out, there's a quick scene in there where there's two men serving the food at a free breakfast program for kids, right? Now, mind you, I want to say, despite the carrying of the guns, the black militancy, the violent type of exaggerations put upon the Black Panther Party, they never became a top security threat to the FBI, as they said it, under J. Edgar Hoover, until they started feeding kids. Why? Why is feeding kids so dangerous? Because you're showing people, the communities that are oppressed, that another way is possible, right? Capitalism makes you depend on this system, right? And that's why socialism is so dangerous. That's why the McCarthy era, that's why they're having it now. They're talking about Biden is a socialist, and Trump is this anti-so. By the way, I just drove through the rural South, and there's signs of Trump saying that he's anti-socialist and he's going to destroy socialism and all this stuff, right? Why? You know what? And people don't think socialism is possible. Why does the capitalist class and Trump and all these people go so hard at socialism? Why do they spend these millions and billions of dollars for anti-socialist propaganda? Because they know another world is possible. Right. And I think there's little hints of that throughout U.S. history, but also all around the world throughout history.
Man, we have covered a lot of bases here today. This is good. We're getting a lot of positive feedback in the comments. This feels right. Let's see. Where should we go for? We have about 10 minutes left in the hour. Let's see. What do you think when it comes to, given all the many crises, political, economic, and climate crisis, these three different crises that we're facing, what can we actually do? what can we what is to be done, as it were? What should we do? Should we take a lesson from the Black Panthers and just go out and start conducting radical service, as it were, serving our communities? And how might we go about doing that? How do you think Veterans for Peace, maybe specifically veterans, activists, organizers, how can we really start getting it together and start addressing all these different crises?
Well, just keep scrolling your Facebook wall, and whenever an event comes up, just show up to it and support. And hopefully things will just spontaneously change on a fundamental level. Right. Are you kidding me? This is what we're doing right now. Everybody is doing that. Can we just look in the mirror and be like, that is dumb. It is not going to work. And you know what? I'm burnt out. I'm done with these protests. And when I go to the park and I see average working class Black people in the park trying to enjoy themselves at Malcolm X Park, and a protest comes in yelling for the next 2 hours on a megaphone. By the way, the people yelling have been the same people doing it every single day for the past 3 months. Oh God. Like, the people are tired of it. You know what I mean? So we need to think deeper about this stuff, right? So one of the things that the United Panther movement has been doing while all of these protests, we have participated in the protests a little bit, but we haven't put our full effort into it. Why? Because it's never gotten the people anywhere. It's never really done anything. It might get us a few concessions. They might, the capitalist class may throw some dog treats at us and some, just whatever, they're leftovers. But I don't want leftovers, right? I want to put poor people in power. I want to put the most vulnerable people and marginalized people in power and have them make decisions, because I know it will be a better place and a better world. So how do we do that? Instead of moving from one place or going to Washington, D.C. on a Sunday where all the politicians aren't even working anyways, rather than doing the city hall stuff, I'd rather do base building, right? I would want to build in a more concrete fashion in an oppressed community, because you know what? Those folks in oppressed communities, they're down for some serious change. We just got to be able to relate to them and earn their trust. But we don't earn their trust because we do these little Facebook events and say, come on down to our protest and we're going to fight for your liberation. Come on, guys. What is this? This isn't going to work. So how do you empower the most vulnerable and oppressed people in communities, right? Well, you're going to have to take some time out of your day. And if you've got the computer skills, the document writing skills, the facilitation skills, the organizing skills, transfer those over to the people who live in those communities, build up a solid concrete nucleus or whatever, a solid concrete base in that community, right? And I've seen this happen. I've seen a place where I live where folks seized the land, built a community garden, seized the homes next to it, which were abandoned for several years. And then the local housing authority would come in and raid the homes, but then the very next day be like, whoa, my bad. I didn't realize you had that much power in the community. I didn't realize you were that well respected and that connected in the community. You all actually have some power to get the local housing authority to apologize to you. Now think about all the demands that all of the organizations have come up with since the death of George Floyd. Cancel rent, defund the police, defund the military. Has any of that happened? We're not even an inch closer, right? And if we're not even an inch closer, that makes these demands empty. We don't have any power, because we're constantly moving on from one Facebook event to another Facebook event. We're not building these deep, solid relationships with each other and in communities that can benefit the most from actual organizing. So what we're doing is mobilizing. Look up, go on YouTube, type in Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. Type in Kwame Ture, mobilization versus organization. In 4 short minutes, he tells you the difference, right? He uses the example of MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., being a mobilizer, and Malcolm X being an organizer, right? You can be you can be a mobilizer. Excuse me, how's he say it? In order to be an organizer, you have to be a mobilizer, but you don't have to be an organizer to be a mobilizer, right? Mobilizing is just getting people to show up. You get a good photo op, you share it on Facebook and you say, yay, we did something. And, the city council, the state reps, the federal government, they're all the military, the police, they're all laughing because they think that's what's actually going to work. Right. So go from mobilizing to organizing, look into the deeper strategies, get over your ego and your stigma and whatever nonsense you have about socialist or communist strategies and tactics and ideologies and analysis. If you want to just say, hey, I'm going to scan everything evenly and then see what works best. That's one way of doing it. Right. But I would say just skip all that nonsense. Check out Marx, check out Lenin, check out Mao, check out Amilcar Cabral, check out Fred Hampton, check out Asada Shakur, check out Sophia Bakari. Look at these people who've actually done something, and they did it before the internet, where they're not doing Facebook posts, right? We need to get off of social media as well. Sure, we can use it to our advantage, but we're on it way, way, way too much. And we depended on it way, way too much, where we don't even know how to talk to each other face to face anymore, right? It's kind of awkward sitting in a room silently. When you're standing in line for whatever store you're going to, like, just stand there without looking at your phone and just thinking, like, in 5 seconds, you kind of feel weird, right? Just scan your body, your consciousness when you're doing something like that and be like, why am I having the urge to reach into my pocket and do this, right? I didn't really plan this shit out. I don't even want to do this, but somehow we've been socially engineered through many different aspects from the capitalist class to keep us heads down, focus on this, and not to build real power that challenges them, right?
Fantastic. So let's all remember that all of us are veterans here, and all of us want to see a better world, and we all want to work together, and we want to thank you for coming on the show, Will. Your stream of consciousness just really came alive. I think it connected well with people. What for a final question, what is my final question? I had something in my head just a second ago. What I want to know is, where do we go from here? You already kind of said that. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. So you are affiliated with the United Panther movement. So maybe in the last few minutes here, we could clear up what that is, what its lineage is, and any call to action that you may have for that.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that question. The United Panther movement, or sometimes called UPM, is a mass organization for oppressed people. It's not just a mass organization, it's a revolutionary mass organization, right? Our whole goal is to build a united front against capitalism. We want to serve the people survival programs, just like the Black Panther Party did, in oppressed communities. We want to build these base areas culturally, politically, economically, and socially in oppressed communities. This is where the meat and potatoes are, right? We got to forget about Center City and downtown and City Hall and these petty bourgeois neighborhoods, these these people who have big homes and all this stuff. Yeah, they may got some money or whatever, but we need to go where the poorest people are in our communities and everywhere that we live across this country. Because those folks, I guarantee you, are going to be down for some fundamental change as long as we can earn their trust, build relationships with them, and work with them, because they are the ones that know what's happening to them the most and the best, right? I don't know what it's like to be Black or Indigenous, but they know what it's like to be Black and Indigenous, right? And one thing I've learned through all of my activism, organizing for the past 10 years is that the victims of oppression are much more forgivable than we might think at first, which is kind of a beautiful thing, right?
I think you mean forgiving.
Forgiving.
They're much more forgiving.
Yeah. So, oh man, I feel like I'm getting emotional saying this because I've experienced it, right? It's, the people who are oppressed really do and can forgive the oppressor in many different ways as long as the conditions are right. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But the United Panther movement wants to continue the legacy of the Black Panther Party. They want to build a united, a rainbow coalition initiated by Fred Hampton and the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. If you don't know, the Rainbow Coalition was red people, black people, white people, yellow people, and am I forgetting brown people? But right now, we just use black, white, and brown Panthers as a way to designate because it's more of a political statement. We understand that race is a pseudoscience. It's not a real way to categorize human beings, but the oppression of race is very, very real, right? So we acknowledge that. We want to organize around it, but we want to get over that and understand that it is the capitalist class that is oppressing us all, while also acknowledging and working against racism and sexism and homophobia and all these other things, right? We need comrades to join and teach us these things. We're open to it. We're willing to work with you. We need to build even more. We need to become stronger, and we want to build an international organization against global capital. U.S. imperialism is everywhere, and it needs to die, and it needs to be forced to die because it's not going to just lay down all of its wealth, right? And race is political. So let's continue to talk about it in a comradely fashion. Let's understand that all of our oppression is tied in to a socialist revolution, that socialism is a start to even working towards all of these contradictions in society. We must unite on that issue before it's too late, honestly. And we got to get over, or we got to understand what has failed and what has worked. And we got to look in the mirror and be like, you know what, if we need to change this, let's change this. So that's what the United Panther movement is. Check us out on social media. We have different collectives across the country. And yeah, we would love for you to participate and join a local UPM or build a local UPM collective wherever you live.
That's beautiful,
Yeah.
Will. Thank you.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're right a little bit over an hour. I think we've come to the end of the show. Miles, is there anything? Do you have any last questions or anything you'd like to add?
I'd like to share a few lines from this song, "Migration of the Souled Kind." Since I'm not going to share the video, y'all told me the quality doesn't look good on the StreamYard.
Yeah, this is the art and culture section of the show. Yeah.
So culture is part of the movement. You know what I'm saying? I'm pasting the link to the video into the chat, and Will Griffin shot this video, so it's actually very relevant to this conversation. And the song is called "Migration of the Souled Kind." It's on an album that is a conversation on slavery in America, and I'll just share a few lines from the second verse. This world is afflicted, so many thoughts. So much need to change, and it force feed the cups. The sane are insane. It's all out of sorts. These people playing games like our livelihoods a sport. You know, that's all I'm going to share. So please check out the song and, support Will Griffin at the Peace Report. Become a Patreon member of his because it's hard to do this work every day and put your face out there in the public and make statements that make you friends, but also make you quite a few enemies. All right. So thank you for your courage, and thank you for your efforts and your solidarity in this long marathon of peace work. I really salute that. I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I got nothing but Panther love for y'all. All power to the people.
Hey, Mike, can you put up the call for the GIs, for the call for our active duty members to call the GI rights hotline for anybody who's active duty and looking to who needs help, who's questioning their orders and who wants to talk to somebody, or who's questioning their so-called service and wants to talk to somebody. All right. Peace and love, y'all. You're muted. You are muted, Mike. You are muted.
I just want to say, we'll be here every Wednesday at 5 o'clock Please tune in. Watch out. We may have Will back someday. So, all right. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
All right.